Hello, everyone. My name is Shailen Tuli. I'm an engineer at Google in developer relations. I work on accessibility. And today I'll be talking to you about custom accessibility actions. So what are custom accessibility actions? The one slide preview is basically it's a way to add sort of information to a view that allows accessibility services to provide functionality to end users. It's a pretty cool thing. I hope you will agree. Okay, so basically this is the way the talk is structured. I'm going to be working with you on a sample app, and we will try it out in different ways. But most importantly, we'll try it out using accessibility services. For this talk, I'll use two services: TalkBack and Switch Access. And then we will try to use custom actions to provide functionality to the users of these services that they don't automatically get. All of this will become clear, of course, as we do these things. So first of all, let's just do a demo of the talk of the app. It's a simple app for managing tasks, sort of like a glorified to-do app. You can do all sorts of things with it that you would expect a task manager app to do. But here I am in this talk particularly interested in three things. And we'll focus on just these three things pretty much for the whole time. So when you have a list of tasks being displayed on the main screen, the home screen, you can swipe to archive one of the tasks. You can also use drag and drop to rearrange the task's order. And you can star and unstar tasks. So pretty kind of standard stuff. You've all used maybe every single day a feature like one of these. So what I want to show is that this kind of stuff actually can be made to work with accessibility pretty nicely and without a huge amount of effort. All right, so here's a demo of the app. So here we go. I can swipe to archive something and I can undo that. I can swap out the order, rearrange it back if I want, and I can star things and unstar things. And that's pretty much where I am, right? So, whoops. Let me go back to present. I'm not sure how I got here. Here we go. Okay. So the question is, at this point, assuming you have good tests, good code, everything is working, it is tempting to say, ship it, it works. The problem is, it doesn't really work for everyone. It works for me. I have pretty good eyes. I can see the screen quite well. I have reasonably good touch precision. I can touch the screen. I can do the swipe. I can do drag and drop easily. But not everyone can do all these things. So what happens when somebody who cannot actually physically perform the swipe gesture tries to use this app, or who physically cannot do the drag and drop? What happens to those users? And I think what the answer to that we will find out when we try out the app as it currently stands using accessibility services that I mentioned before. Okay, so actually we'll talk a lot about accessibility. We'll talk briefly about accessibility services. But before I go into that, here's fundamentally the model of what happens when anyone uses an app. A bunch of content is presented to them, and they take certain actions, and possibly, commonly, those actions cause for that content to be refreshed in some way. You click a button, something changes. You scroll, something changes, et cetera, et cetera. So whether you're using an accessibility service or not, that remains the fundamental model of interaction between an app and a user. So what happens when somebody who's blind or visually impaired or motor impaired or deaf or hard of hearing, and I could go on. What if somebody like that is trying to interact with your app? The model remains the same. The content is presented to them in some way, and they find a way to interact with the app, perform actions on the app in some way. Now, that some way is different for every one of these users. Somebody who's blind and visually impaired is probably going to use a screen reader. Somebody who is motor impaired and, let's say, cannot touch the screen or cannot touch it with precision is going to want to use a service like Switch Access, which we will talk more about in a second, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how is content presented to those users, and how do those users act perform actions on your app. And this is where accessibility services come in. So they act sort of as the middle ground. There's the end user, there is the service, and then there is your app. And they use the service to interact with your app. And you don't have to write 10 different versions of your app. You just write whatever you wanted to write. And for the most part, it just all works because the Android framework essentially acts as a translation layer here. So if you write a button and it's clickable, the Android framework will wrap up that information and present it to the accessibility service, which will know it's a button and it's clickable, and will present it in whatever way makes sense to the end user. Sometimes you want to do some custom things. You want to modify certain presentation logic, et cetera, or modify how a user interacts. And for all of that stuff, there are accessibility APIs. And so the accessibility API that I am going to focus on today involves custom accessibility actions. So here we go. So first of all, we'll obviously talk a lot more about custom accessibility actions, but let's see what the app in its present iteration looks like for a switch access user. So first of all, what is a switch access? Switch access is a service. It's shipped on, I think, most Android devices by default. And basically, it's for somebody who can't touch the screen. So what they typically do is they buy hardware, and commonly it's 2 switches that somehow connect to the phone or tablet. We don't have to have switches here. We can just program our phone as developers. And what I typically do is I use the volume keys to simulate those 2 switches. Now, what do those 2 switches do? There's one switch lets the user explore the screen, essentially go from item to item to item. The second switch allows the user to perform a selection. So basically, the idea is you explore content using one switch. When you reach something that you want to maybe drill down into, let's say it's a button that you want to click on, you use the select switch to make the equivalent of a click. In addition to these things, there is a global menu that is presented to a switch access user that allows them to do things like go back, go home, go to your notifications, etc. And then there is a local menu for local actions that are associated with the view that is under focus. We're going to talk a lot about the local menu. So that's switch access. And I have a demo here of the same app using switch access. And the user can do, so here we go, we see the menu. And wherever you see a highlight, that's where the focus is right now. So it's in the header, then on the task, then on the star. And when you press select, you can toggle the star. And you can keep going after that. So basically, this user can, they can't swipe to archive. That option was not presented to them. They can't drag and drop. They can star and unstar, and they can actually navigate to the detailed screen of the task. The thing with the star and unstar is while it works perfectly well, it will probably not scale terribly well if each list item has multiple icons. Like let's say if you had an edit icon or share icon or whatever, the switch access user would have to go through every one of those icons before getting to the next item, and same thing for the next item, etc. So it works, but it's a little clunky, and we can do better. So that's switch access. The other service that is very, very commonly used and is, usually the first port of call for most the developers interested in accessibility is TalkBack. TalkBack is a screen reader, and basically it's for blind and visually impaired users. And what happens is when it's on, when the user puts their finger down on the screen, it will announce what's underneath the finger. And then it tells you how you can interact with things. So for instance, if you want to perform a click, you double tap. If you want to perform a long press, you double tap and hold, etc. And then there are some standard gestures that TalkBack ships with, things to go back, to scroll forwards, backwards, all that stuff. TalkBack also has a global menu, like show me home, take me to notifications, etc. And it also has a local menu, and the local menu is for showing functionality associated with the view that is currently under focus, basically the view that is currently under the finger. what does a talkback demo look like? So just one thing is talkback can be very, very noisy. It's very verbose. And I've discovered that if I have talkback talking, either talkback talks or I talk. And since this is the talk where I'm supposed to talk, what I did was I made talkback's output come out in printed form at the bottom of the screen. So whatever you see in that little toast down there is what talkback is going to announce to the end user. But in developer mode, you have the option of just printing it out. So let's see what talkback can do. So the user uses swipe gestures to move from one item to another. There you go. You swipe and you go to every item. And as you reach an item, it's announced to you. And notice it says double tap to activate. Star is not checked. Double tap to toggle. And when you double tap it, there you go, and you toggle it. So the fundamental interaction model between these two, sorry, I seem to be stuck. Here we go. So basically, talkback will give you information and tell you how to interact. Task 5, owner, you, due in 2 days. Double tap to activate, which basically means double tap to perform a click. Or start button, double tap to toggle. And if you do that, it'll change. That's what you just saw. So again, notice it did all these things, but it never said, do this to swipe to archive or do this to drag this item. It doesn't know how to do that because we haven't told it yet. So that doesn't work. Swipe to archive doesn't work. Drag and drop doesn't work. Star and unstar works, but it has the same problems. You have to traverse twice over each task to get to the next task. Once for all the text fields, and the second time for the star. And that's not too terrible. It's only 2 fields. But imagine, again, if you had multiple fields, if you had an edit button, a share button, what have you, a more options button. Before you know it, the poor talkback user is having to swipe over and over and over again to get this functionality kind of working out for them. So not ideal. I think we can improve this. So first thing is we'll want to fix swipe to archive. How do we do that? So swipe to archive works right now. It worked for me, right? When I actually physically performed the swipe gesture, it worked. So in a certain sense, the logic is already all there. In my case, it happens to be in this callback call on item archived. And so when that happens, so the logic is all there. So the only question we really have to do is find out a way to hook in that logic with the accessibility service. So the view compat has a wonderful API. We'll return to this over and over in this talk. It's add accessibility action. It takes a view as a first argument, which typically in our case would be the root of the task, which is the card view. It takes a label, and it takes basically a callback, some kind of executable, some code that it can run and associate with that label and that view. So how does this work for us? Remember, our callback is already there. So we, at some point in our binding logic, and I'll talk more about the lifecycle of all of this later, we say viewCompat.add accessibility action, some view, in this case, I'm just saying the root, some label, in this case, it'll say archive, and it's very important that this should be a localized string. You don't want to have string literals. This should be translated. And then a callback, which is our on item archive callback. And once you do this, you have told you have told the framework to tell the accessibility services that this logic that is encapsulated inside on item archived should be bound to this text, and that should be surfaced to the end user in a way that is the most easy for that user to use. So now let's see what happens when you have switch access and you try to do swipe to archive. So again, another demo. So again, switch access will work when you press the volume key down. It'll just go from item to item to item. When you press the volume up, it'll select that item, perform a click, focus on that item. So here we go. So we are focused on task 3. We perform the click, and it shows a menu. And in this menu, you can see now there are 2 options. One is to select, and one is to archive. if you select, it'll essentially perform a click and take you to the task 3 detailed screen. So that functionality is preserved. But if you keep going, whoops, sorry. If you keep going, you will see the option to archive. And if you traverse to that and then select it, you will see that it archives the view. So switch access, suddenly now, the switch access user has an ability to do something that was previously only available to a user who could touch the screen and actually perform the swipe gesture. Pretty nice. It didn't take you a lot to write either. So, okay, at least for switch access, we've got 2 issues remaining. Drag and drop doesn't work. Star and star works, but it's kind of clunky. But swipe to archive actually just works. So small victory, and we'll go on and see what this looks like for TalkBack. So TalkBack is going to find its own way of surfacing this logic, this functionality to end users. And what does that look like? Oops. Right, here we go. So it's going to focus on task 3. And it's going to say it's due, and now it says something different. So I'll pause it here. It says double tap to activate, meaning you can click on this. Actions available. Use swipe up, then right to view. So what the TalkBack user who's familiar with this method of communication will say, there is more functionality available. If I swipe up and right, it's like a compound, it's like an upside down L, I will get to see what that functionality is. So let's see what that happens when you do that. You see this menu, and it's a local context menu, which has an actions item. Click on that, and it tells you, hey, you can archive this. And just like that, the TalkBack user managed to archive. Important, when you do something like that, which is destructive, you let the user have a chance to undo that, which is what we did here. So both switch access and TalkBack now are showing the archive functionality, which was not previously available for them. So that's great, good. So we still have to work on drag and drop and star and unstar, but we'll get there. Okay, so let's just do drag and drop, which is actually trickier because drag and drop has some complexity built into it, right? What does your drag and drop really mean? In many, many apps, it means one thing, and in other apps, it means other things. It depends on the business logic of the app. So consider this a first pass. Like, we've got no drag and drop functionality to users of accessibility services. Let's give them something, okay? And then we can iterate on that and improve it. So why don't we just say that our business logic here in this task manager app is to we really care about slightly rearranging the order of things. You know, your task that is third, you want to bring it up to first or second, and you want to move some other task down. So why don't we surface actions that allow a user to do that? Again, drag and drop could be doing something quite different in your app or in another app. But for now, for this app, this gets us a little bit further away, further along on the right path. So, okay, so let's just see again, how do we do this? Same method, viewCompat.add accessibility action. Again, you take a view. It's just typical to do it to the root, add it to the root. You get a string. In this case, it's this example shows a move up string. You could also have a move down string. And then we already have on item moved defined somewhere because drag and drop already uses that. And so we couple that with the accessibility action by using this method. And so how does that look for switch access now? And this should start feeling a little predictable. Switch access user focuses on some item, they perform a click, and now they're shown a bunch of items. They can archive, they can move down, they can move up. So we moved down and it did a swap and it did it really fast. So if we go back slightly, we can see it. All right, here we move down, we click, and it swapped item task 5 and task 2. Okay, it's still a little too fast. But now the switch access user can do something that they previously could not do. So let's keep going. Okay, so it's basically the app is kind of working for them now. It's working pretty nicely. The only thing that's not working beautifully, well, it is also working, is star and unstar, but we can improve that, and I'll talk about that. So at this point, we made tremendous progress for switch access user. Let's see what it works out for talkback. So again, the talkback user is focused on a particular item, in this case, task 2, and they are told, the label is going to be task 2, owner you, due November 24th, 2020, et cetera, et cetera. So it will announce that. It'll say, as before, it'll give you actions. And now you can see what actions it is that you want to perform. You can archive, you can move down, you can move up. Again, you didn't have to do much work to get all this in there. There it is. And so let's say you keep going and you move down, and again, task 5 and task 2 get swiped. So basically, we have a situation now where a bunch of functionality that was previously not available has started to come together. I don't know why I drew a line through the star and star. It works, but it's clunky. Maybe that's why. Okay, so now let's talk about other things that you could do with drag and drop. This is actually functionality I'm building right now. So I am trying to build this app with my colleagues almost entirely using it with sort of an accessibility first philosophy, which is I first want to see how it looks in switch access and talkback, and then we can talk about all the fancy animations and transitions and all the other stuff. So I'm thinking, if I'm using this app, what do I have to do? Move up, move down? Yep, I definitely need those. But maybe move to the top of the section, move to the bottom, which would be like a shortcut for performing a bunch of things, traversals. The other thing is, in the app, we have headers and tasks. So the headers are in progress and a bunch of tasks, not started and a bunch of tasks. Maybe you move it in a way that it goes to a different section, like you have something which is not started and you move it to in progress, changing its status. So you could have a custom accessibility action saying, mark this in progress, mark this task completed, or a combination of those, move down and mark completed, something like that. It's possible to get a lot of functionality. It's sometimes possible not to get it, but you do your best. And I think having nothing is really basically, the user can't use that feature at all. Having something that works that requires a little bit of effort is still orders of magnitude better than having nothing at all. Okay, so moving on. And we're finally at star and unstar. So I made a big deal of, hey, this works, but it's not a good pattern. So it's not a good pattern for two reasons. One is that this doesn't scale if you have lots of views that require focus, that are actionable. You just get excessive traversals, and that can be just a really kind of a showstopper for a lot of users. You're basically just spending all your time swiping right to get from item to item, or in the case of switch access, just pressing your switch over and over to get from item to item. These are not the most comfortable ways to traverse UIs in any case. You don't want to make it any harder by requiring excessive traversals. So that's one problem. The second problem is if you have repeated labels like starred, unstarred, double tap to toggle, right? Over and over again, other accessibility services can get confused by that. Now imagine a service that is in something that we create called voice access, where you use voice commands to click on things, to quote unquote click on things. But if all the things are just called starred, unstarred, it's not clear how you disambiguate that, how a service like that disambiguates. So we basically tell people, you should not have repeated labels on the screen. It's just a poor pattern for accessibility. And the other problem with this is if you're traversing backwards, if you're going forward, it'll say task 1, whatever, starred, double tap to toggle. Well, then you know that double tapping that star is going to toggle task 1. But what if the tasks are not in a deterministic order and you're traversing backwards? At that point, it's not clear. You'll hear the star first, and then you will hear the text, and you're not going to know what the star refers to. So I've discovered when there's a lot of uneasy UI things that are kind of not terrible, but not great, it's a good idea to look for another pattern, a better pattern. So the better pattern, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. You don't. This is not gospel. Is you take away the star and unstar logic from the accessibility service in the sort of normal flow of things, and you expose it as an accessibility action. So what does that actually mean in practical terms? So let's say you have that button, which is the star and unstar. You can mark it important for accessibility equals no. So this is another very commonly used API for accessibility. And this basically it's a signal to accessibility services, ignore this, leave it alone. If you did this and nothing else, the star and unstar logic is completely absent. The user will never see it. But of course, you don't just stop here. You also take all that logic and expose it as a custom accessibility action. Again, view compat, add accessibility action, a view, some string, in this case dynamically derived, and a callback, the callback that you were previously using for star and unstar. And at this point, this should just work. So what's going to happen now is when you're at switch access, it's not going to focus on the stars. It's going to focus on the whole view. And it's going to then give you, as you can even see from the screenshot, options, the actions that are available. Archive, move down, move up, and now star. If you had edit, share, mark important, whatever, those will also show up here. But what that means is, well, why don't we see that? So here we go. So the user focuses on task 3, opens the menu, and task 3 will get starred. There you go. Okay, well, the video kind of cuts off at the end, so it goes back to being on start, but it actually did work. Okay, so basically everything is working now for switch access. And the important thing is the star unstar logic is working with one traversal, and which means that it'll scale pretty nicely if you add more icons. You don't have repeated announcements. You don't have multiple buttons. So remember this slide where we said important for accessibility equals no. So there will be no focus on that when a talkback user or a switch access user is traversing over the views. It'll simply skip it. So there's no problem of repeated labels. So we basically solved a whole bunch of problems, and we made the interface for the UI for the developer, sorry, for the end user rather, quite consistent. And and I'll talk a bit more about what that consistency gets us. Let's just see how this works in TalkBack. It's pretty predictable. Again, user focuses on a task, gets the local context menu, and then finds the star and performs the star toggle. So why is this a good pattern to have all of this stuff exposed through custom accessibility actions? One is, well, now we have parity in terms of users. Like pretty much, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but at least the users who are using no assistive technology and using TalkBack and using switch access, they have something approaching parity in terms of what they can do. But I think the other good pattern for UI here is that you want your primary use cases to be as easy as possible. So the primary use case when I'm in this app, this is obviously different for different apps. The primary use case here is you want to discover what the tasks are in a list context, sort of a summary version of the tasks. So that would be very hard if you had to swipe 5 times to get to from task to task, or hit the switch 5 times to get from task to task. Now it's really easy. You just go one after another after another. But it's also important that the secondary functionality, which is, in this case, in our example, the star unstar functionality, is actually available and available quite easily. You're unlikely to be starring unstarring every single item. You're unlikely to be moving every single item up and down the screen. But you are likely to want to see every single item with great ease. So the pattern here that I am recommending that is really good for accessibility is figure out what the primary use case is and make it as simple as possible for your end user. And then the secondary use cases, you take them and you bundle them together as accessibility actions. And I would like to think that the amount of code you have to write for this is super, super, super small. It's not a lot of effort. You just have to do it. Okay, so where does all this logic live? Like in your life cycle, where do you put all this? There's no one obvious place, but generally speaking, well, here's the, you will probably do something with all of this stuff in your binding logic, on bind view holder probably, or a place like that. So first of all, before we go to there, let's talk about the API again. Add accessibility action returns an int. This is something we haven't talked about yet. So the int is the ID of the action that was registered. And it's a good pattern, it's a good idea to store that somewhere. So a common thing would be define, let's say, an array list, and then you have, and every time you add an action, an accessibility action, you store its ID. Now, why am I telling you to do this? Is because the API is designed to make it very easy. Let's say this is your bind logic in your on bind view holder. You can bind all this stuff pretty easily, like one line here, one line there, and you're off. But it assumes that you're starting with a clean slate. So what I recommend is keep track of your action IDs and call remove accessibility action on the action that you previously registered. So when you start adding accessibility actions, you're starting with a clean slate. What happens if you don't do this? It's easy to get into this problem, and you want to really avoid that. Is this. So user has actions, task 3, they archive, okay? They archive, and then they focus on the undo, and they decide they don't want to archive. So they move back, the view is rebound now, and again, the user opens the actions, and now you see 2 archives. Why? Because the first one was never removed. So, easy, a little bit of a hurdle, but it's super easy to fix this. So you just have, this logic. You have this logic here that you remove all your accessibility actions first, clear your IDs, and then start adding. And that's basically it. I am kind of done. I think I'm done mostly on time. Yep. And I am happy to take any questions. Question, Shailen, will this slide and the video and the code be available after the session? Yeah, I have no idea how the videos are disseminated. I am assuming they are. But the code and the slides will be available probably in not too long from now. We have to clean up the code slightly. And actually, we're going to publish this app that I was using as a demo, because not only this, it also has lots of other ideas for accessibility that I think it would be good for developers to know about. There was a question. Oh yeah, great question. Do you and your team find a way to make visual testing with users with disability during the pandemics? What a good question. I didn't find a good way to do it through video call. So I'm not entirely sure what visual testing here refers to. I suspect this is something that has been on somebody's radar. It hasn't been on mine, but it's a really, really excellent question, and I hope the answer is yes. I just don't know that space so well. Next question. Is there a way to remove all accessible actions rather than having to cache action IDs and iterating over them? Currently, there isn't, but emphasis on currently. I hope that will change. Excellent question. Would the introduction of Jetpack Compose change anything with accessibility service? So understand that accessibility services exist regardless of what the toolkit is that is being used to build an app. So I think fundamentally, where I expect, I mean, Jetpack Compose is a work in progress. So it's hard to talk about something that is still evolving. But basically, my sense is that for the end user, it shouldn't matter at all whether an app is built with Jetpack Compose or with the view-based toolkit that we currently use, or frankly, even with a completely different framework or different UI toolkit. So essentially, all of these toolkits will have to do the right thing for accessibility so the user experience is good. I'm not sure that answers your question. Not sure if I missed this. No, you didn't miss it. I didn't talk about it. But what do you recommend for automated accessibility testing? So this could be a talk unto itself. So I will leave this brief. Basically, there is a very, very easy way to take what is called the accessibility test framework, which is something that Google publishes. It's a way to automate a lot of testing, and it's got a very easy one-line, two-line integration with Espresso. So that gets you in there. For testing the stuff I talked about today, it's fairly simple. You can just say perform accessibility action in your test, and then you can verify a state change. Is there a way to automate testing for accessibility services? I think that may depend sometimes on the service. They may automate some stuff. I generally don't. First of all, I'm not totally sure I understand exactly what the question means, but I generally think that you don't want to be testing against automated testing against a service as much as in manual testing. I am a big believer in manual testing. You want to see how your app is working, turn on TalkBack, turn on switch access, try it out. The problem with automated testing is, while it's great in many ways, it'll tell you, for instance, hey, your button is missing a label. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you if your label makes any sense. So automated testing is very good for catching a certain class of errors. But what you really want to do is manual testing. And in the end, if you have a mature product, you really want to test it with actual users. And I think that has a lot of good stuff comes out of that. Can you say again where to call the view compat or add accessibility action should be made when binding views? I think when you have a view holder, I can go look at my code, but I don't have Studio open right now. But I think most of this logic that I demonstrated today lives inside the on-bind view holder stuff. I mean, if your stuff is completely, I could be wrong about this, so please don't hold it against me. But if your stuff is completely static, you could probably do it in onCreate, but I think you need to do it in onBind for at least the stuff that I was talking about. Sorry, I missed it, but how do you bring up the accessibility actions menu after turning on TalkBack? When you have focus on something, you perform an upside down L. In fact, it'll tell you. If you turn on TalkBack, will tell you, I think what it says is actions available. That's, if you don't hear that, that means there's nothing for you to do. But if actions are available, you swipe up and then right as like two very quickly joined gestures, and that will open up the. It's not the actions menu, by the way. It's the local menu. It has actions, but it has other things too. Is there a tool to measure some coverage of how much of the app is accessible? No, because I think for the same reason that I mentioned earlier, automation has while valuable, has its limits. So we have a tool, for instance, called Accessibility Scanner. You can get it from the Play Store. What it does is it takes your screen and runs a scan and gives you suggestions for improving the accessibility, which is a really, really good tool. It should be sort of in every developer's toolkit. But do understand, again, it is not a substitute for manually testing your app. Manually get in the habit of turning on TalkBack. You don't have to be an expert. Get into that habit of turning on switch access and try out your stuff. You'll know in 2 minutes if it works or not. Is it a good practice to follow WCAG pattern for accessibility for mobile apps? Should we always rely on that, or can we make some customizations sometimes? So I'm not an expert in WCAG. I'm not a web guy. And I'm not, so I don't want to speak specifically about when you should follow WCAG or not. I think many of the recommendations that we generally make on developers.android.com are very much in sync. Again, I don't want to say that they're exactly the same. I don't believe I know. But if you are following WCAG patterns and in a careful manner, you're probably doing good stuff, is what I'm thinking. But again, I'm not an expert, so you should probably ask an expert. I think we're done. If you have questions about accessibility, you should feel free to write to me, my full name at google.com, and I will respond to you. Thank you. I enjoyed the questions very much.